think I'm recording. Am I recording? I am recording. Okay, cool. So I'm going to go a little bit more in detail about note set number 2, which is on if statements, and cover some things I didn't get to touch on in class as much as I would have liked. First off, the first thing I want to discuss are errors when it comes to if statements. So let's say I say that x is equal to 4, and I'm checking the sign of x, and maybe I will do something like this. And I'll discuss what this is in a second. Okay. So here's a simple code. Or what I'm doing is I'm going to check the sign of the code. So x in this case is 4. If x is greater than 0, it will display that it's positive. Else, if x is less than 0, it will display that it's negative. And this else here is all remaining cases, which for the case of a positive, negative, or 0 number, the only remaining case is that it's equal to 0, which is why I've displayed this here. Now, the way that this works in general is that it will start at the top and then go down. And as soon as it sees a statement that is true, it'll enter into that loop, and then it will ignore everything else. So if I were to run this, say I run the section, I get positive. That makes sense considering that the number is positive. If I plug in 0, it's going to go towards the last one and then say x is equal to 0. If I say it's negative, whatever, and I run it, it'll tell me that it's negative. So a few things. One, if there is an error, there's two kinds of errors here. Let's say I do an error like this, where this is an error, but MATLAB doesn't break. And I'll explain what I mean by this in a second. It's not like a technical way of explaining this, at least that I'm aware of. So in this case, this part of the code is a totally well-written part outside of the fact that y isn't defined. So the question is, will this code run? So let me clear everything. Oops. So if you were to say, okay, x is 4, if x is greater than 0, it displays positive, this will work even though y is not defined. So if we run this, we see that it's positive. But as soon as I set this equal to 0, again, which is this remaining case here, this will cause an error because y is not defined. It does display this because that comes first. You can look at the order here. This text is so big. I need to lower this. So x is equal to 0. It does display that. Then as soon as it tries to do this, it says there's an error because it doesn't know what y is. So that type of error is not critical for the code to run, only in the case that x is 0. Now, if I were to, let me comment this out, and we'll ignore this for a second, but if I were to have an error that MATLAB really doesn't like this, for example, this is a major error because it does not abide by MATLAB syntax. Like even immediately, you can kind of see in this right corner here, oops, let me see if I can move that out of the way, error found. If I were to comment this out, that error found goes away. There's a check mark now. If I come back to this, it's still a check mark because of the fact that this doesn't break MATLAB. But this one, because of the fact that I cannot do any sort of operation to the left side of the equal sign, that is an error. So even if I were to come in here and this part of the code is true, I'm ignoring this part essentially. Maybe I'll just delete this for real cleanliness here. MATLAB will just tell me automatically I can't run the code because of the fact that this error is here, even though we are not entering into this portion of the if statement. So depending on how severe the error is, that'll dictate which response your code will give, whether or not it will run and be incorrect in some cases, or if it won't run because there's a major error like this that's at the bottom. So that is the first thing I wanted to talk about, was the concept of errors in MATLAB. The other thing I want to talk about is the order of operations. Well, maybe not order of operations, order of if statements, we'll say. And I do have an example of this in the note set, but I'd rather, talk about it more in depth with you. So let's say in the note set, I'll just copy it. This is on page 7 of note set 2. If z is less than 10, we will display z is less than 10. We will do else if z is greater than 0, we'll display that z is positive. And end. And again, for the case where we do not have an else, we only have if, checks this condition, else if, checks this condition. Else would be every other possible scenario. And if we don't include it, that means we are not considering it. I hope that makes sense. So I'm trying to think of an example here that would work. So like, for example, z is less than 10. Well, that is all numbers less than 10. Maybe I can change this and say, and z is greater than 0 or something. That means that it's only within 0 and 10. Only positive between 0 and 10. This one checks if it's positive, whatever. The else case would be every remaining case. The way it's written now, I don't think there are any other cases because of the fact that this is less than 10. But that's besides the point. What I want to demonstrate here is the order of the operation. So if z is 7, it's going to come into here, and it's going to check, is z less than 10? It is, okay? We're happy. We're going to display this. This is ignored. Even though it's true, it is ignored because of the fact that we have already abided by a condition. It is going to check which one is true first. So if we were to switch these, I'll just switch which one goes where. And if that didn't make sense what I just said, I recommend that you rewind. But basically all I did was change the order of this. If I run the same code switch in the order, now it's going to just tell me that z is positive. So it goes in the order. This whole thing is considered one statement. Everything between if and end, this is one statement. Now, if I wanted to test both of these things separately, I would need two separate if statements. So z is positive, let's say, and maybe I'll check if z is less than 10, display z is less than 10, and so let me put a section here so we can see that we're looking at this one. So the difference is this one will only run one of these because of the fact that we are going in order. This is one block of code essentially, and only one of the conditions can be met, if any. In this case, we're going to come in and say if z is greater than 0, display z is positive. Cool. That is one block of code. This is a whole separate if statement, so it will run this as well. So in this case, you will end up seeing both of these things appear. So I've run the section, I get both of them. So if we were to write these together in one if statement, only one of them runs. If we were going to write them separately, each of them will run. No, if it's true. In this case, if I do 11, for example, this one would be true, this one would be false, run. Because of the fact that it's less than 10. If I were to do, let's say, -3, this one's false, this one is true. Z is less than 10. Well, it's a negative number. Even though it's negative, it's still smaller than 10. So in that case, that works. I hope that makes sense. I didn't really get to cover that in as much detail in class as I wanted to. But the big things here are the errors, when is it going to break, and then what will happen depending on how you write your statements. So if you want to do something like this, where you have only one occurrence or one thing were to happen, one output, then you would need to put them all within one if statement. If you didn't care, if you wanted it to be two separate operations, you would need two separate if statements. I hope that helps. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.